We're trying to get a sense, early days here, of course, or day one actually of the new parliament and the speech from the throne, trying to get a sense of whether parties are interested in making sure that's the way Parliament works, that there is cooperation. CPAC's Martin Stringer spoke with 3 members of Parliament for their reactions to the speech today and the prospect of cooperation.
Arif, Virani, Michael Barrett, and Don Davies, thank you very much for taking the time. I want to start with you, Arif, Virani. The throne speech, generalities, not a lot of specifics, a lot of commitments. What do you think Canadians should make of it?
I think Canadians should make of it that there's a conciliatory tone. There's a note of cooperation that was mentioned. There's also very strong, important issues that were raised during the campaign and will continue to be raised by our government in this parliament, namely addressing affordability, working to alleviate people's concerns about people who are living in poverty, people that need tax reduction. Also concerns about climate, very strongly and loudly articulated, specifics were provided, and also gun control, which is a very pressing issue in this country, and a commitment to pharmacare moving forward.
Okay, Michael Barrett, on behalf of the Conservatives, what do you make of this throne speech?
Well, we're disappointed, to be frank. The Prime Minister made a show of meeting with all the opposition leaders, taking their feedback after being humbled with not being returned with a majority. He received a minority, and we didn't see a lot of things that we would expect. And fiscal responsibility is one of those things. And there's no mention of a balanced budget. Western Canadian alienation is it's very real and very relevant, and no strong signal that there's going to be any change of thought or tone on things like Bill C-69. So that's concerning. And Canadians are tired of platitudes. They want real action. For example, banning handguns in a city when it's already illegal to carry a gun down a city street is going to do nothing to curb violence. Taking firearms away from lawful gun owners does nothing when the government does need to actually crack down on things like organized crime and gun smuggling. Okay,
I want to come back to on some of those subjects. Don Davies, your initial impression of the speech from the throne.
Well, I have mixed feelings about it. We just went through a federal election, all of us, and 6 weeks ago we were talking to Canadians from coast to coast about what their real needs are. In Vancouver, and I'm sure in my colleagues' ridings, we know that there are people right now who need medicine. People who are having to cut pills in half, people who are skipping rent in order to pay their medication costs. And we know that Canadians want real action on climate change. So in that sense, I'm a bit disappointed because the throne speech, although you expect some generalities, is really, really vague and void of any real commitments. And the funny thing is, in the throne speech, where the government does want to be specific, where they did have timelines, where they do commit to legislation, they say so. But if you take pharmacare, for example, there's a vague reference to taking steps towards national pharmacare. So there's no timeline, there's no commitment to introducing legislation, and there's no details about committing to public universal comprehensive system, like the Hoskins report said. So we want to make this parliament work. We're optimistic. New Democrats are going to be there to try to make these things happen. But so far, I think the throne speech could have been stronger and more specific than it was.
Okay, how about on that big specifics that was not in the throne speech, and that is about the pharmacare program? It's a multi-billion-dollar promise. It still remains very, very vague. I mean, you just commit, as Don Davies has said, you just commit to moving forward on pharmacare. We've had reports, we've had commitments, we've had 4 years of government, and we've had an election, and there's still nothing specific about whether it'll be single user, universal, what form it will take. When will Canadians have some concrete details about the pharmacare program?
So I think the pharmacare program is one of our fundamental priorities. That's why you had it mentioned in the throne speech.
The priority, why no specifics?
So the specifics, I think, will be coming. I think it's important that people understand that we appreciate that we are the only country in the OECD that supports publicly funded medical care and not publicly funded medicine. That is an anomaly of one. That is not a good group to be in. We've heard that loud and clear. We've heard that across party lines. It's an important initiative. It's part of holistic healthcare.
But that's yet to wait for, though.
We will be moving forward with it, and I think it's important because we've campaigned upon it, and we know that even with the Hoskins report that Don rightfully mentioned, it didn't call for an implementation on day one. It called for a phased-in implementation. That is what we will be working on. We can't simply implement a proper scheme sort of tomorrow. It's not that facile. What we need to do is do it methodically and do it correctly. correctly so that we are addressing the needs of all Canadians.
And on the gun control, you alluded to gun control. I mean, there's a lot of different types of gun control. What specifically would the government be? I mean, the promise during the election was just to allow provinces and municipalities to regulate. What is the specifics on gun control?
Well, there's also a very specific commitment that was made and was reiterated today to deal with military-style assault weapons and to eliminate them and to also include a buyback, because we've heard from people, including the people that Mr. Barrett might represent, who have indicated that if you're going to make some changes, you have to do right by property owners that were abiding by the law at the time they purchased. That's a fair argument. That's called listening to the other side and incorporating their views to ensure that the legislation is fair and balanced. That's what we will be doing. But people need to be reminded of, when we hear about massacres, they're not just massacres that have occurred abroad. We've had massacres in this country. Tomorrow's the anniversary of the École Polytechnique. We had the January 29th mosque massacre, where a gun jammed, lest we forget. A gun jammed that could have been much more lethal had it not jammed, and that was a military assault style weapon.
Okay, Michael Barrett, so your party is going to vote against this budget?
We're going to put forward amendments to the throne speech, and we're optimistic that with the conciliatory tone mentioned by my colleague here, that the government will consider and incorporate those amendments into the speech, and they'll be on some of the items that I've mentioned. But certainly it is a generality. There is more that needs to be done on crime, particularly in urban centers, and that's of real concern. There's also crime issues in rural Canada, but when it comes specifically to firearms, it has a direct correlation with organized crime, with gangs, and that's where we need to target. And a vague definition or definition list term like assault style firearms is not going to scratch the itch that the government is looking to, if they are looking for real action on that at all.
Okay, last word to you, Don Davies, in terms of how your party is going to deal with this.
Well, we've just read it now, and we're going to give it full consideration. I do think that the Conservatives saying they were going to vote against the throne speech before they read it was irresponsible, and that's not an approach we're going to take. We're going to study the bill. There are some positive things in it. I'm happy to see the reference to primary care and making sure Canadians can get access to family physicians. There's a reference to mental health care, and we all know that we need to really up our game when it comes to that. So we're going to talk about it with our caucus and our leader and see what happens in the days ahead.
Okay, we're going to watch this with great interest. Obviously, the throne speech is just the beginning. We'll have lots of pieces of specific legislation. I want to thank all three of you and welcome you back to Parliament.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.